Okay.
Beautiful. We
But I got to go back.
we are ready for action here. So thanks so much, guys. If you just decide to pop in, hey Melissa, good to see you in here too. I know you mentioned on my Facebook that you're going to be checking us out. So really glad you could make it. Dacre and I promised. Dacre's amazing. Actually, I can't believe that he has agreed to do this again, which is incredible. So after our, or I should say his abbreviated version of it. I don't know how you got through that, Dacre, but you made it look professional. Like it was meant to be.
There was some speed talking going on. I wanted to try, with the time we had, which is half of it, I was trying to squeeze it all in. But that's why I like quality, and I'd much rather do this one, as a bonus to all you folks that couldn't get the full presentation in, and also thanking the organizers for trying their best, and Rick. But sometimes the gremlins win, and the dark forces took over. But we're going to fight back.
Exactly. Well, thank goodness you're talking about Dracula, because I guess if you really need to speed it up, you could have just said, and then the sun came up and he burned in the end, and stay tuned to find out what really happened on the next presentation. What?
No, well, I tell you though, Rick, if you guys hang in here till the end of my talk tonight, you're going to actually hear hear my proof of, and see the proof of the first 3 chapters of Dracula that were edited out of the Dracula typescript, that were once going to be Dracula and never became that way. And I've seen the proof. I'm going to share it with you tonight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be really cool, because I know you and I have chatted a couple times before, Dacre, and sort of hinted at some of that stuff. But man, when you see it, like all the stuff that you've dug up, it really is such a huge part of history, and such an unknown part of history too. So I mean, I'm so grateful that you spent such a big part of your life researching and literally digging all this stuff up, going around the world, putting all the pieces together.
And it's fun. I meet a lot of cool people. I get to great places, take a lot of cool photos, and get to share it. And that's that's what I like. My heart and soul is as a teacher. And for those of you who are listening from Canada, I'm born and raised in Montreal. I used to teach at Appleby College in Oakville, right next to Burlington. So when Rick told me about the DreadCon in Burlington, and I just heard you guys are going to hold it again there, it was like a very close 10 years of my heart at Appleby. But I was not doing Dracula then. I was teaching physical education and some science, and now my whole world has changed now that I'm in the States and doing research and traveling around the world to find cool stuff that I'm going to share with you guys.
Yeah, perfect. No, really appreciate that. And so, all right, so I think we'll get things going here then in just a moment. So if you, for everybody that's just joining us, so again, really appreciate you guys all being here. And, the beautiful part about doing this live on stream is that, I also get to thank everybody who decided to tune in from literally wherever in the world you guys are from a super presentation about what I consider, certainly one of, if not, the most iconic entity in the entire history of dark culture entertainment, Dracula. So I know there's a few of you that probably do know me. I know that there's certainly a couple in here, such as Melissa. We had a chance to chat for a moment in Burlington at the DreadCon. But for 99% of the rest of the world here who don't know me, my name is Rick Hipson, and this is such a huge pleasure to be able to host this presentation with Dacre Stoker. Certainly my first true love began with Dracula and all things vampires, probably way too young for being subjected to that sort of thing, but it absolutely changed my life. So it's a huge honor for me to be able to host this Stoker on Stoker, Unearthing the Secrets of Dracula with some genuine horror royalty in Dacre Stoker, who, as some of you may already know, is, of course, Bram Stoker's great-grandnephew. And basically, I've spent about 20 years, interviewing, reviewing books across various tropes of horror. That's sort of where Dacre and I came into place. He had been on a podcast of mine previously after being introduced to a cover artist, Lynn Hansen, who actually, I don't know if you guys can see over my shoulder here, who did the cover art. I'm just going to turn my back for a moment here so you guys get a better look. So Lynn Hansen did the beautiful cover art for this edition, 125th edition of Dracula. Beautiful cover. And then she, of course, introduced me to Dacre, who's been nothing but a dream to chat with. And it's just been incredible. So we did that through my first podcast, of course, Dark Bites, which a lot of you are probably watching this streaming live right now. That's how I came to know Dacre and his work. Again, after getting that introduction. And I think it's just an absolute testament as well to the power that a book can hold, that here we are after 128 years since Dracula's inception of the world. His name still continues to evoke this huge range of response, like dread, curiosity, respect, repulsion, even comedy and romance, depending on iteration of Dracula, maybe first brought you guys into the fold as well. So I did expect that, when I first met Dacre, that just the fact that his last name is Stoker, that he would also elicit maybe some of those emotions as well. But I was really disappointed that the first conversation I had with Dacre was, anything but dreadful. He was just a fantastic, genuine, really accessible man who's more than happy to share a lot of his life work, going around the globe, piecing together all these amazing artifacts about Bram Stoker and Dracula. And it is my absolute pleasure to be able to, again, host this awesome presentation. Dacre Stoker, original Canadian as well. Dacre, thanks so much again for being here. Really appreciate you giving us the unabridged presentation that we're all meant to see. And without further ado, I'm going to flip the table over to Dacre, who is going to take the stage and begin his fascinating presentation of Stoker on Stoker, Unearthing the Secrets of Dracula.
Thank you. And Rick, let's just make sure you guys are seeing the screen with a picture of me holding the book and Bram on a stamp with Bram Castle in between. Is that what you guys now see?
Yeah, if anybody can't see it, just mention in the comments that you can't see it. And I should also just back up a quick moment.
Yeah, do that about the questions. So,
yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, so there is going to be a period of questions, Q&A after the presentation. The presentation will be about an hour or so, and then we'll open it up for questions. So what I would suggest, so that I don't lose track of questions, I'd hate to lose the great questions from you guys, is if you do have a burning question now or during the presentation, maybe just write that out somewhere where you can simply copy and paste it in after the presentation. And then once I turn things back over to all of you guys, I just suggest putting some question marks beside your question, so that way I can pull it out in case people start, you guys start talking amongst yourselves or talking about things that don't have to do with a specific question, just to sort of keep everything organized. And really, it's more for me and my ADHD brain. I don't want to miss any questions, so that's the best way to do that at the end.
Yeah, and I'm glad to field these afterwards, but just not during, because you never know. 2 slides from then, I could be answering your questions. So let's roll on now with a little bit about where I get this information from as I travel the globe. You guys can find some of the stuff. It's accessible. The Dracula Notes is at the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. The Dracula Typescript, a little bit harder. That's actually out in Seattle, Washington, and that's owned by the Paul Allen Estate, and they don't let too many people see it unless they're doing serious research and have to document all that. Bram Stoker's Lost Journal, I actually discovered my great-granduncle's journal in one of his great-grandson's attic in the Isle of Wight. It's now been published. You can see it down there with that young-looking Bram on it. That's available, as are all the rest of these books, on Amazon. The books in the London Library that Bram actually used for his research and he listed in the back of his notes, almost like he's writing a master's thesis, are in the London Library. It's a private library. You can't go in there and see it. But again, the Dracula Notes have been published by 2 Canadians, Miller and Bassang, and that's also available on Amazon, and you can see what those books are. I'm going to talk about some of them tonight. Stoker Family Papers and Insight. Well, there are 2 great-grandsons still alive who lived with their grandfather, Bram's son, and you probably don't have access to them like I do. But you can put your hands on the Dracula Annotated for the 125th anniversary. That's this kind of blackish book on the far right corner, bottom of your screen, where I really spill all the secrets about what was taken out of the Dracula typescript. I'm going to be talking about that near the end of my presentation tonight. But let's get to the books. This is primarily a literary presentation, although I do recognize how important film and stage and popular culture have been to my great-granduncle Bram, but the books are really what defined him. So here's some cool early edition Draculas. The one in the middle column, right-hand side, mustard color. That's a first edition, 1897. That's actually my edition that was passed on down through the family, signed by Bram to his mom just 8 days before the novel came out in 1897. All the way across to the left, I also have a copy of one of those. It took me a while to get it. It's not the family one. I had to buy it at auction, but that's a first abridged edition, paperback edition, with the lovely sort of almost cartoon sketch of the Count crawling down the wall with Harker looking out, realizing that this is really a supernatural creature. The book has been out in over 1,000 editions in 30 languages. It's never been out of print, and one reason why is because it's gone public domain in 1962. That means no publisher anywhere in the world has to pay royalties to anybody. They can put out their version of Dracula with a new cover, can be annotated, add illustrations to it. That's one of the bonuses of going public domain. But my cousins who would normally get royalties, they're doing okay in their own lives. No hardship there. Over 700 movie citations of a Dracula in movies since Nosferatu in 1922 and counting, and over 1,000 comic book and stage adaptations, which means, boy, this book is really firmly implanted in entertainment and in popular culture. Let's go to the author himself and look back at who my great-granduncle was. So just so you understand this, he was one of 7 kids. His youngest brother, George, was my great-grandfather. Of all 7 kids in the family, only 3 have offspring. Bram had the son, as I mentioned. The son had a daughter. She was married twice in World War II. Both husbands died in World War II. She is left with 3 boys. From there's about 12 of direct descendants. Of the indirect descendants, it's just my family that have anybody left in our roots. There's about 12 of us. The one other Tom who had a child, a daughter, and then that daughter got married, had a kid. There's no more left in that family. So of 7, only 2 offspring to this day. Bram was born in 1847, known as Black 47, in Ireland, just outside of Dublin, called Clontarf. Ireland was going through a really bad phase of the ramifications of cholera epidemics, potato famine, so a lot of illness, disease, poverty, people coming into Dublin looking for soup kitchens, stealing food from gardens. I mean, it really was rough. On top of that, Bram had a mysterious illness for the first 7 years of his life, which is almost fitting when you think of the guy that grew up to write the macabre Dracula. The stories he was told by his mother of her own experiences as a young child growing up with the cholera epidemic, which I'll touch on in a moment, but also Irish folklore and things. It's really quite fitting. And I think that had a big part in him developing a very dark sense of imagination. He did recover at the age of 7, and in 10 years, he was physically fit and mentally capable by passing exams to go off to Trinity College and play sports, like you see in this collage here. He was a big man on campus, winning awards in long-distance race walking, rugby, rowing, track and field. The guy was like an all-around big man on campus. He was also the head of the Philosophical Society, the Historical Society, and he ended up getting a master's in mathematics as well. This is where Bram gets interesting, because I've really looked into the type of personality he's had, and without him writing an autobiography and me really getting to know him personally from his own writing, I've got to look at what he has said and done, thoughts, words, deeds, and actions, and help piece it together. By finding his journal, that really helped. But by realizing he had a master's in math and his very detailed side of him, and then also that he was a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, really loved going to theater, that he was a very creative soul as well. That's where the writing side of Bram comes out. He worked as a clerk in Dublin Castle in the Petty Sessions Legal Department. There's the detail side of Bram. He got promoted to become the clerk of all, the inspector of all clerks throughout Ireland. So here's where the Jonathan Harker in him come out. He gets in trains, he gets in carriages, travels all around the 30 different counties of Ireland and checking that everybody's doing all the right legal work with all the right details. He found that it was in complete disarray. What's the first book he wrote? The Duties of Clerks of Petty Sessions, which was a manual still in use in Ireland till 1960s. So some people joke and say, well, that's the first book of horror that he actually wrote, how to fix the Irish legal system. But he did that. But at the same time, he was writing theatrical reviews, which gave him his entree to Sir Henry Irving, who came to Dublin to play Hamlet before he was knighted, mind you. He was an up-and-coming actor. Bram wrote a wonderful theatrical review of him. Irving had a big ego, sought out this one young writer who did a nice review. They partied all night at the Shelburne Hotel, and Irving said, well, one day, young man, I'm going to own my own library, and gosh, can't even say that, my own theater, and I'd like you to come help run it. Within 2 years, he fulfilled his promise. And Bram packed up, married Florence Malcolm, who had been dating Oscar Wilde a little while before that, moved to London, and his dream came true. He was in with the literati, the center of the universe. He was helping running a theater for Irving, running all the books as well as the creative side of the Lyceum Theater. He wrote Dracula and 12 other books during his free time, which wasn't much, mostly during his summer holidays while he was off the official duties of Lyceum Theater. And he died April 20th, 1912. Why is that important? It's the same week that the Titanic went down. And ironically, one of the articles Bram wrote, again, in what little free time he had, was an article about the shipbuilding yard in Belfast and all the minutiae, how the whole thing came together so nicely. Thousands of people working, lots of machinery, and it was the same shipyard where the Titanic was built. One of the quotes I want to leave you with comes right out of the novel, but it really sums up my Uncle Bram. People ask me, what did he believe in? What was he like? And I said, I think this was from the heart. There are mysteries in life which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. He was very well aware of all the mysteries of the occult, and we'll touch on that in a moment. Actually, we'll touch on it right now, because the occult movement in the late Victorian era was all centered around the Industrial Revolution, not just machinery, but it was science and it was religion. Charles Darwin published Origin of the Species in 1859, and it brought into question the creation theory versus evolution theory, which this gave rise to spiritualism, people wondering now if religion was telling us to have a good life, you got to do all the right things, follow the golden rules, you'll go off to heaven and you'll be just fine with the golden harps and the clouds. If you don't, you go to hell and you burn with the devil. Well, when science started looking at things like evolution, that brought into question all the theories of religion. So scientists were beginning to think, well, maybe there's more about connecting with spirits of the dead. And that's when the whole ideas of the supernatural, is there any kind of devil? Where does he live? People were thinking in the center of the earth, the volcanoes being portals to hell. Then fringe sciences started popping up. Mesmerism, which was included in Dracula. Hypnosis in Dracula. Phrenology in Dracula. Bram was also very good friends, and he brought Pamela Coleman Smith off the streets to be a set designer and a painter in the Lyceum Theater. She was the original artist for the Smith-Waite tarot cards. Seance, Ouija boards, these were all the fashionable things to do. Bram was a Freemason. He was not a member of the Golden Dawn. But these secret societies were popping up where learned men could actually think and discuss about things that were not quite proper, that were not discussed in religious meetings, but in these meetings of free spirits. Now, when we focus that idea right into Dracula, you've got to realize, and if there's any authors out there, you'd probably understand this, that as an author, you are affected by what's going on around you, especially if you're a theater manager who does curtail the scripts of the plays to match the sensitivities and the likes and the dislikes of the people who are your audience. Well, Bram did exactly the same thing with his book. He knew what nerves to touch, what sensitivities to work with. So he had this very unique perspective on capitalizing on Victorian sensitivities. And what he did was he made Dracula resonate as possibly being real by writing it in the epistolary style. That's journals, diaries, letters, newspaper articles. He also included real places, real people, which you get to in a moment, and real events as well. My good friend, former University of Toronto professor, Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who passed away a few years ago, she called it the willful suspension of disbelief. And that's what we authors try to do when you write historical-based fiction. Give them enough real markers within the story to make them believe that the not so believable would be easy to digest and accept. Let's talk about Bram's mother for a moment. I believe she was the inspiration for the character Mina and also indirectly Renfield. Why do I say that? Well, she was a social activist, a mother of 7. She actually sort of broke the glass ceiling by forcing her way into the All-Male Statistical and Social Inquiry Society of Ireland to give papers on the education of the deaf and the mute. This is where sensitivity to people with mental health conditions comes up, i.e. Renfield. How to judge if somebody was criminally insane, i.e. Renfield. She also survived the 1832 cholera epidemic as a young girl, and that was like our COVID, but even worse. People were dying at the drop of a hat. They had no idea what was causing the cholera. And what was happening is as people were getting the disease, it was from rats coming off of ships, coming in to Western Ireland. As people died, they were buried, their body decomposed. Spoiler alert, took them a while to figure out as the bodies decomposed and leached into the ground, the germs leached into the water. And the graveyards were normally up the hill. Water flows down the hill. The water table that flowed into town where people would come and get their drinking water would get infected. Many people died. Why did her family, the Blake family, not die? Because they were actually drinking from a well that was up a hill. They got lucky. So did we, because without that, there would be no Bram Stoker, no Dracula, and obviously no me either. Lots of bedtime stories of Irish folklore mythology that she told Bram. And if you do any research into Irish folklore mythology, it's not the little leprechaun from Lucky Charms. It's cautionary tales, banshees, pukas, changelings, all about life-sucking creatures if you don't do the right thing. One furthermore thing about the cholera epidemic is it was so horrible that she actually witnessed as a young girl, 13 years old, her neighbor being misdiagnosed of the cholera and buried prematurely, and then crawling out of the grave with the help of her husband to live and not having caught the cholera. So imagine where Bram gets the idea of bodies crawling out of the graves and living or not living very well as the undead. Here is one of the very few things I found out that Bram wrote about himself, and it's a book that he wrote about Henry Irving called Personal Reminiscence of Henry Irving. Well, Irving had been knighted. He was also the most famous actor around, so this book was a bestseller. But he wrote a little bit about himself, and that's what confirmed what I had known about Bram, but now he says it for himself. In my babyhood, I used to understand to be often at the point of death. Certainly till I was about 7 years old, I never knew what it was like to stand upright. I was naturally thoughtful, and the leisure of long illness gave opportunity for many thoughts, which were fruitful, according to their kind, in later years. Now, just let that sink in for a moment. Bram is saying in this very dry Irish way that the stuff that he went through, his natural thoughtfulness and the stories he was told and the nightmares that he had, and the leisure of long illness, 7 years, gave opportunity for many thoughts, which were fruitful, according to their kind. And Dracula is not his only supernatural thriller. There was Lady of the Shroud. There was Mystery of the Sea. There was Jewel of Seven Stars. There was lots of others that had these really interesting supernatural creatures, ghosts, and so on, to haunt you, just like it did this young man. What was this disease? I really don't know for sure, but I think it was probably respiratory allergies and asthma. Long story short, I've done research with forensic doctors that look back at these types of eras and what the illnesses were. In the family, we had a lot of asthma and allergies. We still do to this day. It's been passed on. The type of bedding, the type of pillows, feather pillows, straw or hay wrapped in linen for the mattresses, and Clontarf was very musty and mildewy. When the Stokers moved inland a couple of miles from the mildewy bay, Bram recovered to have no further disease. So it's not like he had something that stuck with him that stopped him from being a champion athlete with a great respiratory system. But I also found that he had an uncle, William Stoker, MD, who wrote a treatise on fever. And everything that people couldn't diagnose back in those days was, oh, he's got the fever. She's got the brain fever. He's got the fever. What would they do? They'd either cut you or put leeches on you to suck out the bad blood. The Victorian doctors at the time simply said, we take out the blood. They were taking out the good and the bad. They didn't know about the antibodies or germ theory, any of that stuff. I believe that Bram was bloodlet. repeatedly. And when this treaty said for kids, they didn't know how many cc's of blood to take out, just enough until the kid passed out. And then they rehydrated them when he came to with a mixture of claret, which is red wine, and oil. So if that's the case, then this next slide may have some truth to it, that Bram wrote chapter 4 in Dracula with his personal experience in mind. As Jonathan Harker went to try to kill Count Dracula in his coffin, he said, it seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. Could that have been personal experience? Maybe. If not, it's just speculation, but it makes a good story. That's what J.D. Barker and I used when we wrote Dracula. And there's a scene in there with pretty horrifying bloodletting that young Bram had to sustain. So let's get back to Henry Irving for a moment. Henry Irving, big, tall, strapping man with a top hat there, Bram behind him. That's where Bram usually was, in that secondary role. But here's a rare picture because there weren't too many photographs of the time. I believe Bram based his character, Count Dracula, after Henry Irving, both on and off the stage, as well as a mixture of Vlad the Impaler, which we'll get to. Look at the picture of this devil's assistant right there, Mephistopheles playing Faust. Henry Irving's second most popular role behind Merchant of Venice. We'll get to that a little bit more. One other thing he picked up from Irving that helped him with his writing of Dracula was he came to America 8 times, North America, that is. And here's a map of the Eastern United States when he came in his tour, one of his tours, where Bram was so detail-oriented, he had to draw on this map that he picked up somewhere all the train routes. And he actually figured out, look at the far right-hand corner, 82 miles to 1 inch. He knew exactly how far the train routes were. He knew the cities where they're stopping at, because it was Bram's job to make sure that all 100 people on this tour, not just Irving and Ellen Terry and the other actors, but the set designers, the costumers, the painters, all these guys who came over 3 months would get on the trains at the right time and get off the trains, and the buses would be waiting and so on. Guess what, folks? This is exactly what Bram did in the novel Dracula when he had all the details of train travel for the characters so they could travel all over Europe when they went from one place to another, Romania, all the way to Paris, all the way to London. Here's the letterhead, guys, that I have found that actually touches on 2 of the 8 tours, and look where he came to: Montreal, Toronto, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and so on. He was actually in Canada 1895, 1896, while he was still writing Dracula. And they came back later, 1899 and 1900. Dracula came out in 1897. So this is just showing them that he came to Canada and had a wonderful time. And you look at the library reviews, you'll see what they were playing at different theaters. Here's your first look at Bram's horrible handwriting. I've transcribed it for you. So if you're writing down questions, here's the chance to write down an answer. See if anybody can figure out whose train schedule this was that appeared in Dracula. Bram was so detail-oriented. As I've said before, he wanted to get everything right to create this willful suspension of disbelief that even the train schedules came right out of the Baedeker Guide. And you can see what Bram was writing right there. And the Borgo Pass, as you'll see in a map in a little while, he didn't have to invent that. That's a real place. Bram went to a holiday in Whitby in Yorkshire coast. And it was about 7 hours or so by train from London. And this is where he had Count Dracula land in chapter 7. Incidentally, he was planning to have Count Dracula land in Dover, which is a very famous port, until he came to this holiday in 1890. And this is where he started in earnest all of his writing. And we have proof of that because the local newspapers actually listed all the people that were coming to stay in the guest houses. So you can actually see Mrs. Vesey's guest house. You had Bram Stoker, Mr. and Mrs. Master Ed Stoker, that's their son, from London, staying in Vesey's guest house. The address, 6 Royal Crescent. Guess where Lucy Westerner and Mina Murray stayed in Dracula, which was placed in 1893. 6 Royal Crescent as well. And to this day, there's a blue plaque there. The Whitby Civic Society is very proud of the fact that Bram Stoker stayed in Mrs. Vesey's guest house, but they got something wrong. If you look closely, he didn't stay there between 1890 and 1896. He only came once. After that, he started going to Cruden Bay, Scotland, and we have records of him signing the guest book in those years. And there was no newspapers of him staying beyond 1890. So that's just a little bit of a myth that I've been able to reveal with the help of David Pybus of the Whitby Museum. This is the Gothic atmosphere that attracted Bram in the evenings. The graveyard outside St. Mary's Church, which also spreads over right outside the very Gothic-looking ruin of Whitby Abbey, that both of them are featured in the novel. What was also important at Whitby is they did have a subscription library. That's the old building in the middle. That is where Bram Stoker found Vlad Dracula III of Wallachia. Nowadays, that library has not been torn down because they have good historic ordnance, but it is quayside restaurant and bar. In that library, though, back in the days, there was a book by William Wilkinson, who wrote something called The Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. And in that book, Bram found these words: Dracula in the Wallachian language means devil. The Wallachians were at that time, as they are at present, used to give this as a surname to any person who rendered himself conspicuous either by courage, cruel action, or cunning. What did Bram do in chapter 18 when Van Helsing was trying to tell the band of heroes who the heck they're trying to catch? If it be so, then he was no common man, for in that time and for centuries after, he was spoken of as the cleverest and the most cunning, as well as the bravest of the sons of the land beyond the forest. So you see on the quote on the left, he's not a supernatural creature that lives for centuries. On the right, this is what an author does to take that information and to use it to his advantage and turn Vlad Dracula into a supernatural vampire. He was not a blood drinker, guys, but he was clever and cunning and brave, exactly the backstory Bram needed to make people believe that all these old guys from Wallachia, which is the province right next to Transylvania. So Bram also moved this guy a little bit north into Transylvania to connect him to all the superstitions that were up there. We'll see where that came by in just a few moments. I mentioned earlier the Dracula typescript owned by the Paul Allen estate. This is what caught my eye. Now imagine this. You're looking through these typed pages and you see things crossed out. Well, that means it's never been published. So this little piece right here confirms my theory that Bram was thinking of that figure from the poster of Irving playing the role of Mephistopheles in the very famous play Faust, when this page came from the part of the book when Mina was on the bed and Dracula had broken into her room. Not Lucy now, that was early in the story, but Mina, where he forced her to drink from his chest. And Bram had written, even then at that awful moment, with such tragedy before my eyes, the figure of Mephistopheles in the opera cowering before Marguerite's lifted cross swam up before me, and for an instant I wondered if I were mad, so on and so forth. So these are the type of things that I've included with Robert Bissang in my Dracula annotated for the 125th. So to sum up this part of the presentation, Dracula is a mixture of Henry Irving on and off the stage, of Mephistopheles, of Vlad the Impaler, and then this mini statue that I actually purchased and had a friend paint is the way Bram Stoker described him. He is not the sexy Frank Langella or Christopher Lee. He's not Bela Lugosi in the white tie and tails. This is the way Bram actually described him, and I think he's horrifying and cool. Now, take a look at this for a moment. Before I say anything, just take a close look at this page. It is the page that many authors write down their list of characters that you're thinking of putting in their story. Now, because I only have about an hour tonight, I can't show you all three of them, but this is the first of 3 pages of characters as Bram starts to refine them. And this page, look at the very middle in between the 2 books where you see Count and then Vampire crossed out. The original name for his Count was going to be Vampire from Styria, a province in Austria. My theory is Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu wrote Carmilla some years before Bram wrote Dracula, fellow Irishman, got people thinking that vampires exist in Styria, which their folklore says it does. Why not place Dracula there and call his Count Vampire, until he finds the book that I just showed you, from Wallachia and moves him to Transylvania instead and changes the name to Dracula. Writes at the top of the page as well. If you look at some of the other names on the left side of the page, he's got the doctor of the madhouse, that's the asylum, that's Seward, girl engaged to him, and so on and so forth. Go back to the right side and you'll see the name Cotford, a detective, not used in Dracula. But Bram, being as legal-minded person as he was, originally planned to have Detective Cotford in the story. Never used him. So Ian Holt, Alexander Gallant, fellow Canadian, we put him in Dracula the Undead. That's how I have used some of these characters to keep them alive. Characters that Bram thought of, but never used in his novels. And they live on through my prequels and sequels. Just also an idea to show you some of the other research Bram did of real things. The Russian schooner, the Dmitri, Bram found in the Coast Guard log in Whitby, a ship that actually was carrying silver sand from the mouth of the Danube, ran into the harbor in a big storm, and he talks about the logbook of the Coast Guard. We'll get to that in a moment. He also found the book about weather patterns. He had to make the storm that brought in the Dmitri, turned into the Demeter, under real conditions, even though it was a supernatural storm. He wanted to make the darn thing as realistic as possible. Now, here's something I haven't shown previously, that Bram actually received a letter from a journalist called Robert Leighton. Robert Leighton went to a dinner that Bram was attending at Hall Caine's house. Hall Caine was a writer. He was also the guy that Dracula was dedicated to. Hami Beg, that's his nickname from the Isle of Man. Robert Leighton said to Bram, I remember that some time ago when I met you at Hall Caine's on Sunday night, you told us of the Russian ship into the Whitby harbor. That's exactly what I just showed you. So Bram actually mentioned that at a dinner party. A journalist remembered it and was trying to get Bram to give him an interview. Back to Whitby and the harbor. Look at the rough sea outside the harbor, the path of the Dmitri coming into the piers. Ships would go between, well, many places in the North Sea, but a lot of them between Newcastle and London with coal. The coal ships. And when the storms got up and the seas got rough and there was lots of these rocks and reefs outside Whitby, to save themselves from getting wrecked, they'd come into this harbor. Exactly the same thing that the Dmitri did under full sail. And that's, you'll see the wreck in a moment. Now, if you've ever read Dracula, or you do, the prequel to Dracula, The Suicide Graves, you can see that unconsecrated graveyard just outside the regular consecrated graveyard at St. Mary's Church. Little hint for those people that have read that book. Now, Bram actually did a ton of research, as I showed you, but he also drew, because he was a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, his hand-drawn diagram of Whitby Harbor. You guys just saw a piece of that. And now Bram had to draw that so he could get all the details right when he was in Cruden Bay, Scotland 2 years later, and had to go by memory on how the ship had to come in through the storm, as you see right here. And this is what he pulled out of the Coast Guard logbook. Somehow he got one of the guys at the Coast Guard to give him that book. There was no photocopy machine back in those days, guys. But he got Coast Guardman Pethernich to give that to him. And it described this ship, the Dmitri, coming in and wrecking on Tate Hill Sands exactly the same way he did the Demeter in the novel Dracula, which took place in 1893. But why did he set the story in Transylvania? Who do we got to give credit for there in his research? Really did a bunch of it. Lady Jane Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mother and Bram's good friend William Wilde's mother, was a literary mentor to Bram. She was also an author. And one of the books in the London Library, which is also in Bram's own library, was Ancient Legends of Ireland. And we'll get to that in a moment with the next slide, exactly what it says. There was also a Scottish writer named Emily Gerard, who wrote all about Transylvanian superstitions. That attracted Bram's attention. And these more books in the London Library by Bonner, Mazzucchelli, Cross, Samuelson, etc. All these guys were adventurers that went to Transylvania, to Bulgaria, all these faraway countries, because the civilized world really ended in Hungary and Budapest. And then it got dark and wild beyond there, and then really dark and wild beyond the Black Sea into the Ottoman Empire and Turks. These were all the books that Bram used from the London Library. You can see all the titles. You can see all the authors. That's what put Bram in Romania. He never went there. I've been there 14 times and I lead tours there. I'm going back again in a couple of weeks to lead a tour with Mysterious Adventure Tours, and we're having a hell of a ball in Bran Castle, literally. So if you want more information about that, you can chat with me later, but this is how my uncle got there. Luckily, many people went there before him. Here is the excerpt from the book from Lady Jane Wilde. She says, in Transylvanian legends and superstitions, of which Madame Gerard, that's who I mentioned, has recently given an instant record, many will be found identical with the Irish. And she goes on to say, but the Romanians are a mixed race, Greek, Slav, Teuton, Gypsy, and many of their superstitions are dark and gloomy, especially those relating to vampires, wolves, and terrible demons, evil spirits, and fearful witches. I think that resonated to Uncle Bram, and that's why he focused on Emily Gerard and started reading her books. And this is what she had in her books. It was an essay called Transylvanian Superstitions that first appeared in a magazine called 19th Century that Bram also wrote articles in. And then she expanded it into a book called Land Beyond the Forest, which translated means Transylvania. Look at the stuff in red at the bottom. She didn't invent these words, but she found them. And some people think, well, she may have got a mispronunciation. But she wrote vampire or Nosferatu, to kill vampire, drive stake through the corpse, or fire pistol shot into coffin, or cut head, and replace in coffin with mouthful of garlic, extract heart, and burns through ashes over grave. Thank you, Emily Gerard. Bram didn't have to make any of that stuff up. It was existing folklore that Bram could use to insert into his novel, once again, as a way to make the story seem real. So how did Bran Castle become Dracula's castle? In a similar way. There were two sketches in those books that I just showed you, and the only sketches of any castles in any of these books about Transylvania. One was in the Bonner book, the other was in the Mazzucchelli book, and guess what, folks? It's Bran Castle. Then it was called Toursburg. And if you look at that, it's exactly the same as this modern-day picture. I am convinced that Bram Stoker, especially being the artist that he was, looked at these two sketches and wrote this description of the exterior of his castle. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on three sides it was quite impregnable, and great windows were placed here where sling or bow or culverin, and so on and so forth. He described this thing to a T based on these sketches. But the location where this thing was not in the town of Bran near Brasov. It was somewhere else altogether. Bram did his research and needed to find a different location. And I'll tell you why in a moment, but he used these map coordinates, 47 east longitude, 25 3/4 north latitude, puts it right here up in the northeast part of the country. Bran Castle is down where that magnifying glass is. Wallachia is the province down below. Transylvania is the one up above. So he simply moved the ruler of Wallachia, Vlad the Dracula, Vlad the Impaler, up into Transylvania. Why? Because that's where Emily Gerard said there was all these superstitions about vampire, and also that's where the Borgo Pass is and Mount Izvaro. He found in these books that this was an extinct volcano. Volcanoes were portals to hell, home of the devil. You see how it starts to come together again? His Dracula character was this mixture of the devil and Vlad the Impaler, known as the devil. So this is why this stuff comes together in a very logical sequence. Bram making the story seem real. Here is Cruden Bay, Scotland, about 40 minutes north of Aberdeen. This is the town, what it looked like back in the day. Top left, the hotel that Bram stayed in is a little nicer than it was back in the day. It's been refurbished, but it's exactly the same hotel. Here's the guest book with Bram's name, his wife's name, Florence Ann Lemon Stoker after that, and Irving Noel Stoker after that. And here's the other books that he wrote while he was there. And I'll tell you something, guys, if you want a really good book, The Mystery of the Sea, The Lady of the Shroud, Lair of the White Worm, you can get them on Audible, and or you can read them. They're really cool supernatural stories as well. Cruden Bay also had a castle that Bram used for the layout of the interior of his fictional Castle Dracula. The picture down below is what the castle looked like in the day. Pretty gothic and scary looking. Bram was invited in there by the Earl of Errol on more than one occasion, I understand. Nowadays, unfortunately, it's a ruin. But because it's a ruin, we can see that right in the middle is an octagonal room. Now, chapter 2 When Jonathan Harker arrived at the castle, he said, the Count halted, putting down my bags, closed the door, crossing the room, opened another door, which led into a small octagonal room, lit by a single lamp and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door and motioned me to enter. It was a welcome sight. That is the exact layout of the interior of Slane's castle, and I think Bram experienced that same thing of walking in when the Earl of Errol met him and brought him in to that reception room. Funnily enough, the single lamp, I gave this lecture to the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel. All the townsfolk were there, and one guy in the back got up and said, my name is Robert Hay. I'm a descendant of the Earl of Errol. And when the family had to sell the castle and stripped everything out, my father got the lamp, and I now have that single lamp from the octagonal hall in my flat in London. So that lives on, which is quite cool. Of the books, I actually purchased some of them myself from Abe Books and took a photocopy of one of the maps. It happened to be the map that Bram used to lay out the train travel between Klausenberg and Bistritz and Borgo Pass. And then my friend Hans de Roos helped find out where Mount Israel was, which is just not a very long carriage ride along a rough trail to get down to the extinct volcano. It's also in these mountains where there's a lot of sulfur and gold, which you'll get to in just a moment. I was so curious, I had to go up there and take a look at it myself. So my son and I went, we hired some guides, and we went into the Kalamani National Park, and we found this location, and we actually buried a small thermos with some cards in it in different languages to say, we believe you have just found the location of Bram Stoker's fictional castle. Spoiler alert, there's no castle there. But this is my sort of way of saying, you take the outside of Bram Castle, the inside of Slane's, you put it together, here's the right location, and there now is a plaque on that rock face, with permission, mind you, showing that for tourism, that this is the location of Bram Stoker's fictional castle. Now, why am I so sure of that, folks? Because one other cool little gem that I found, and that is also one of the things crossed out in the typescript of Dracula. The original ending of the novel, which does not exist in anything public other than the copy of Dracula that Robert Basang and I published, shows this. Right after Quincy Morris and Jonathan Harker get onto the carriage and knock the crate off the carriage that's been guarded by the gypsies, but Godalming and Seward are fighting them off with their Winchesters. And what happens? Seward slits the throat of Count Dracula. Morris stabs the Count with a Bowie knife, not a wooden stake. At that point, look over the right side of my page. As we looked, there came a terrible convulsion of the earth, so that we seemed to rock to and fro and fell to our knees at the same moment with a roar that seemed to shake the very heavens. The whole castle and the rock and even the hill on which it stood seemed to rise out of the air and scatter in fragments, while a mighty cloud of black and yellow smoke, volume on volume in mighty grandeur, shot upwards with inconceivable rapidity. And there's a little more, but you get the gist. Bram Stoker planned a volcanic eruption at the end of the novel, right when the Count was seemingly destroyed. He disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving the door open for him to come back at some point, especially since either Bram or his editor did away with this very destructive volcanic eruption. We don't know exactly why it was, but it was changed. So that is another little thing to look at. Which brings me to, what are the other secrets that I am revealing to you guys tonight that come from cross-referencing Bram's notes, the Dracula typescript, and the novel itself. So, since the typescript starts on page 102, stands to reason that 101 pages are missing. So, back up a little bit more. A manuscript is what the author writes. That might be a picture of Bram right there writing his manuscript. Who knows? He handed it to a typewriting service. I've seen the stamps of the typewriting service on it. I've done my research. But once it was typed, the page numbers were changed and 101 missing pages. But also there was many deletions and some additions. I believe that chapter 1 was taken out. And I'm going to show you what that is. I believe chapter 2 was taken out, as was 3. And here we go. I think because of the date on the top of that letter that
March 8th, 1890, even before he went to Whitby, Bram was beginning to write his story Dracula, with chapter 1 being a series of letters laying out the background of the story and all the movement of the characters and their relationship to each other. So you can read it easily while I'm talking. You can see all these different letters Bram was planning. Now, Bram was the theater manager. He had to send all kinds of letters to people to set the stage for his plays at the Lyceum Theater. I believe he was doing exactly the same thing to set the stage, establish the relationships for the story Dracula. And look at this. He even gives a little summary. I put it in red. In this series of letters is told to visit Castle, Munich Dead House, people on train knowing addresses dissuade him, met at station, storm arrive, old castle, left in courtyard, driver disappears, the Count appears, describe old dead man, made alive, waxing color, dead dark eyes, what fire in them, no human, hellfire stay in castle. That kind of sums up very sketchy form Dracula. So I believe that's chapter 1. And if you look closely, there is more info in his notes talking about book 1, chapter 1, and a description of all these letters. He even has Wampir originally still in those letters that he was planning to write. Because what the heck was going on, guys? Count Vampire was writing letters to lawyers in London to help him buy these 3 different houses. Harker goes over there to consummate all the deals. So all these letters had to go back and forth. But I believe his editor said, you know what? That's kind of dull and boring. The book is pretty long as it is. 485 pages. We got to cut out some. So he cut out 100 pages, and that's all these letters. I've never found the letters because that was shoved in the bin after it was typed. But I found the notes that tell me that these letters existed. What was chapter 2? Because we have found that. It's been hiding in plain sight. It was published in 1914 by Rutledge and Company, and actually a preface by Florence Stoker, who 2 years after Bram died, published the stuff. And she said, a few months before the lamented death of my husband, I might say, even as the shadow of death was over him, he planned 3 series of short stories for publication. And the present volume is one of them. To his original list of stories in this book, I've added a hitherto unpublished episode from Dracula. It was originally excised owing to the length of the book and may prove of interest to the many readers of what is considered my husband's most remarkable work. Now, I found 4 sentences from the Dracula typescript, in the Dracula typescript, referring to specific details in Dracula's guest that had to be crossed out, because logic would tell you that if the publisher says take out that chapter 2 as well, Bram had to go through the rest of the typescript and cross these things out because they all refer to things in Dracula's guest. So if you're wondering about what Dracula's guest is, go to bramstoker.org. It's a free website put on by a Professor McAuliffe. And you can read all of Bram's public domain works for free, and you can read Dracula's Guest. Only 17 pages. I highly recommend it. It is a story about a very Jonathan Harker type character who is not named anything, but trust me, when you read it, it's Jonathan Harker, and all these things happen. I won't tell you what they are, but you can see that they're all crossed out, which means they occurred in Dracula's Guest. Now, chapter 3, after the Dracula's Guest incidences occur, the character, Jonathan Harker, who recovers in his hotel, the Quatre Saisons, actually visits, as if he hasn't had enough scares already, the Munich Dead House, and then attends a night at the opera. How do I know that? Because Bram himself and Irving went to the opera, and the opera that was playing that night was the Flying Dutchman, the story of Wagner's opera of the cursed ship that could never come to shore. Foreshadowing, guys, of the ship, of the cruise ship, of the voyage of the Demeter. So he mentions this Munich Dead House where things happen, just like the things crossed out of Dracula's Guest. He mentions man in Munich Dead House. He had only been so far north as Munich. This is Dracula as this experiment, so he would not at first quite know how he got from London to here. So these are all things also crossed out. And then if you look at the way Bram led out the story by using a daytimer, he had mentions of Harker coming to Munich, going to the Dead House, and also going to the opera, the Flying Dutchman. Bram was so detail-oriented, he even had the whole novel laid out in the old-fashioned daytimer. So, folks, that is my end, as I said, or is it? I've been at this 14 years. As Rick said at the beginning, this story is 128 years old. I keep finding new and interesting things. And if you want to find out more about what I do or what I do with all this stuff, is I find co-authors who can actually write stories better than I can, but I provide outlines, I provide research. Some of the stuff I do write when it comes to the nonfiction parts. And also I've taken my hand at writing bits and pieces of comics and even providing dialogue to these authors. But I want to do this stuff. I don't want to do it a disservice. I'm not a trained author, but these stories are pretty darn good. And both Dracula, the Undead, and Dracula become international bestsellers. And the stories are darn good, if I may say so myself. They're all available on Amazon, being mostly Canadians, I'd imagine. It's much cheaper to get them from Amazon with free shipping. You can buy them from the bramstokerestate.com and I can sign them for you. But the shipping to Canada, I think, is about $20. So not trying to tell you don't buy them from me, but I want to make sure you guys get a good deal. So now it's time to stop screen sharing, Rick, and let's chat with our folks and let's see if we can get everybody back alive here. On live, I can stop screen sharing. And now we can see if there's any questions to ask or just anything that comes up.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Dacre. It's absolutely fascinating. And just as we're waiting for any questions to kind of pop in here, I actually noticed myself there's a couple of different parts I can click on where folks are chatting in. So I'm glad that I had a chance to see that. One of the things you did mention, just while we're waiting for anybody else, somebody have some questions regarding going to the Bram Stoker estate. I think you'd mentioned previously that you're going to be adding some new items on there as well.
Oh yeah. Do I have any right in front of me? I found some. Oh yeah, hold on. There we go. So, that slide I had at the beginning. I've had my daughter help me create a pattern with all these different Dracula books.
Oh, that's
right?
Cool.
And what we've done is we've turned them into different things. That is a little pouch. We've turned them into an actual bandana. I've turned it into a very nice woman's scarf with very soft material. I've turned them into really cool men's belts. I've got, what else? I have a wine carrying container. Okay. Because I'm also now involved in Stoker wine, which is about to come out in North America in about a week. I'm actually heading to New Orleans this weekend. It's coming out on the 13th. And I'm actually, this is so cool, Rick. We're announcing it at Francis Ford Coppola's house on the 13th at the launch of Stoker wines from New Orleans. So yeah, there's new things. It takes me a little while to post them actually on the signature store. Because I'm a little slow doing that stuff. It's technically it's a pain to do, but it's worth it. So we're getting new cool stuff with all this design. If you're interested, just keep coming back to it until I get it on there. And it might even be sometime in November when I come back from all my travels.
All right, perfect. As my son makes an appearance here as well.
Hey there, hey, and what's his name?
Mackenzie.
Hey, Mackenzie, how are you? You like this time of the year because of the candy or the spook scares?
1 second, he can't hear you. I have my headphones on.
Oh, you got the head. Well, okay. All right.
Yeah, he loves this time of year. They'll get pretty excited for Halloween.
All right. Well, I see Melissa. Thank you for at least being with us. I'm not sure who else was, but I hope you guys enjoyed this and learned a little something. Rick, will Stoker wine be available? Oh, not just yet, Lydia. Here's what's beginning to happen. As you well know, every state in the U.S. and every country in the world, they all have very different rules about distribution and traveling through countries. So right now, or starting on the 13th, it'll be available by a company called In Good Taste. Out of California. We are looking into Canada and England, but boy, oh boy, it's Romanian wine. It's an existing winery, and it's soon going to be available in more places than just the U.S., but it takes time. So, Lydia, be patient, and it'll be worth it because the labels are cool. The wine is very good, and it'll be worth it.
Is it only red wine, Dacre?
Well, in our area, we only that we have purchased. If you imagine, Romania has about 5 wine growing regions because of the big Carpathian Mountains. You got these microclimates like Napa, right? Our region only grows the red wine, but we're trading grapes with places in the north of Romania where the Germans came in years ago that grow white wine, sometimes that more Riesling type wine. So they're different grapes in different parts, and we're switching. We're trading. So we will be marketing white wine. We've already got rosé, but it may not be grown in our particular vineyards, but it'll be marketed. And Lydia, thank you. Maybe I'll have to pop her. Yeah, maybe sneak over the border, or if you got friends, have them order in good taste to Buffalo or somewhere, then slip over the border and go get some, because they're going to come in a cool little box with lots of little bottles, like 4 bottles to taste it before you have to buy the big ones.
That's amazing. I definitely can't wait for that. Now, when you say North America, Dacre, of course, here we are. We go from chatting about Bram Stoker and Dracula, of course, and we're all here focusing on the wine.
Well, yeah. Everybody likes to talk about booze, right?
Sure.
Let's get back to Dracula. Do you think Bram would appreciate the modern version of Dracula, or more just as his literary? So, Pugs, great question. Rick, I get that a lot. Do you think Bram would appreciate the modern version? So here's what I think. I think he'd be really appreciative that the thing he created and packaged, a myth that had been going around for hundreds of years, but he packaged it in a special way that has been then adapted hundreds of different ways in the last 128 years. You know, from Sesame Street to the Munsters, all this different kind of ghoulish stuff. It didn't all start with Dracula, but an awful lot did. Now you got the sexy vampires, Vampire Diaries, True Blood. You got Frank Langella. You got, Gary Oldman, all these different versions. I think he'd appreciate that. And I'll tell you why. He knew darn well that mostly his idea, but he was a theater manager, right? And in those days, it was like, yeah, they adapted different plays to suit the time. And look what things like Cats and Les Mis did. They had massive long runs on Broadway, off Broadway. Nobody's had 128 years like Bram Stoker has. And it's because of people like Rick and all you guys who are listening here who are dying for more adaptations and interesting takes. I'll tell you what I'm dying on. I'm dying on somebody to do an episodic Dracula like Bram wrote it. Yes. And that's why J.D. Barker and I wrote Dracula the way we did. And Holt and I did Dracula the Undead, because it was, in our opinion, more like the more Bram style. So I'm hoping and praying for that. I might just have to get involved myself to bring the world a Dracula the way Bram did it, not some of the more modern iterations. But thanks, Pugs, for asking.
Yeah, no, that's great. Great question, Pugs. And I'm glad that you saw that, Dacre. It would have taken me a moment. That was in the private chat, which is where they should be, I suppose. But I was looking in the comment section. So,
okay.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So I know I've always wondered that before, too, is, what would Bram think about all this stuff, especially with some of the more, the quirkier stuff like the Renfield movie that came out there, the other 2 years ago, I think.
And yeah, Nicolas Cage in New Orleans. I mean, yeah, it's different. It's a takeoff. It's an adaptation, whatever you call it. But it's like, Van Helsing has been taken many different ways, and Renfield has. And it's just, again, if you hit humor, if you hit farce, if you hit satire, you hit, come on, who's our Canadian guy that played an airplane?
Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Yeah. We got a comedian like that doing Dracula. It means you've made it, man. Because
Dracula 2000.
What were Shadows is a perfect takeoff on all these things. That means that the genre is strong. It's not just pure horror anymore.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that, Bugs. Yeah, that's what the cool thing is. He absolutely transcends so many different genres. I remember as a kid, I don't know if I mentioned this before to you, Dacre, but I believe it was The Young and the Restless. And if anybody's seen this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the soap opera Young and the Restless. Grandmother used to watch it. I thought it was just boring. It was worse than watching paint dry, except they actually had, I think, maybe 5 or 6 episodes. Of course, they always had like 20 different plot lines in one episode. But the one plot line they had was about Dracula, a vampire who had the cane, the wolf head on it. And I was glued to it. I love that. I was in. I was watching those soap operas.
I didn't know that. Now, I was just recently up in Newport, Rhode Island, doing this other thing that I do, which is court tennis. I had a young man that I coached that won the world championship just 10 days ago. But while I was in Newport, I was reminded that Seaview is a place where Dark Shadows was filmed, and the Canadian Jonathan Frid played Dracula. So there's another little nod to one of our fellow Canadians.
Very cool. Another good question by Lydia. Are you able to? Can you see that, Dacre?
I can see that. I'm curious, since Jack the Ripper case was so close, 1888, to the timeline of Bram beginning to write Dracula. It's evident Bram was a reader. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I know for a fact that Bram and Irving had to change the subject matter of some of their plays during the, post Jack the Ripper, because it scared the heck out of people so much that they were, didn't want to go out. They were worried that they were going to get Ripperized, So I think, and this is something that Holt and Gallant and I put in Dracula the Undead, that the Cotford character was, we thought about him being a guy that was trying to solve the Ripper murder, but it went unsolved still to this day. So he came back, and people began to think that these murders that were happening in London when Count Dracula rolls in 1893 were very similar, or even mistakenly, as a supernatural Jack the Ripper, and tied it all together. So that's something that we felt was something that influenced Bram, and then used it to our advantage in writing our continuation of the novel.
Yeah, that's amazing. And he was so well read, it sounds like, and he was just almost like a human sponge. It seemed like that he was able to allow so many different things to influence him, and kind of like what Pugs mentioned here too about the fact that maybe not a lot of people really think of it that way, but there really is so much body horror.
Well, there was, and it's the type of guy that Bram Stoker was, and that's why you got to read Beyond Dracula. He did the same thing with Jewel of Seven Stars, the same amount of Egyptology that was huge in those days. This was when people were stealing stuff from Egypt, and they were worried about the curses. Bram did all his research in that, and wrote, and had this sort of supernatural element there. So Jewel of Seven Stars, Mystery of the Sea, same thing, very historical, and made everything seem sort of real. So that's because Bram was so detail oriented from his role as a Masters of Mathematics, a clerk of petty sessions. He got you to believe. And to me, guys, if you, even for a little while, and that's homage to my good friend, Dr. Oz Miller, believe by willful suspension of disbelief that this story is real, to me, it's even more scary than stuff that's over the top gory. There's no way that's true. But if it could be, that really could have happened, that scares the bejesus out of me.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, Lydia's right here too.
I remember when you had
no dark alleys. Yeah, she's absolutely. Sorry, what were you gonna say, Rick?
Yeah, no, sure. I remember when one of our previous chats you had mentioned about the forgive me, I'm probably not going to mention the term correctly. Vivisection, I believe it was.
Vivisection. Yeah, no, vivisection. You're right. Yeah, that was something that, again, Bram's older brother Thornley, who managed to help him with all the medical stuff in the novel, which is the transfusions and the evil scientist element of Count Dracula being doing experiments on Renfield. This is because back in the day, Thornley was an inspector of vivisection. Vivisection is when, for medical science, they'd remove the skulls from dogs, monkeys, cats, rabbits, and poke and prod into the brain to see which parts of the body would move. Well, Thornley was an inspector of vivisection because too many professors, doctors who were teaching doctors, were doing this needlessly, and these animals were really getting abused, and they were dying, sadly, without antibiotics. They were getting infections. So it is something that Bram incorporated in the story, that Dracula was an evil scientist as well as a supernatural creature.
Yeah, well, I think that's just absolutely fascinating. That again, just transcends so many different genres, fits so much into this gothic novel, which is so much more terrifying than than it first meets the eye. Especially when you realize that so much of it is based on these true, relevant things that actually happen in Bram's life and around him with history.
Yeah, and I like what Pugs just said. And I agree. I think some of the comedy and satire adaptations are a way of coping with very real discomfort. Yet that is you're absolutely right. If we can laugh at things, then they're not quite as horrifying. But it all, to me, it also shows that, horror is out there, and books we can close, TVs you can turn off. But if you can laugh at it, it's easier to cope with it, But it also, we don't want to desensitize people to doing bad things. But it is a way, it's a good coping mechanism. Back in those days, though, the Victorian era, there was a lot of horrifying things, but also their belief system wasn't nearly as refined about, what's going on after death. But I'll tell you this, there's almost as much paranormal investigation going on nowadays than there was back then. So it's not like we found the answers and we've stopped looking. It's just now they start pulling out all these little machines and things to think they're picking up sound waves or whatever. Not really sure if they are or not, but we're still looking for the answers. And that's why I need to wind this down. But that's why I like to say, Rick, Bram Stoker had it right. There are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. We're still trying to solve all kinds of stuff. And I think Bram was the open-minded kind of guy that was capitalizing on people that were wanting the answers. I mean, that's what the novel Dracula is all about. You had the scientist, Seward, trying to get proof. The other guys, the lawyer, Harker, the American Morris, the Lord Godalming, all trying to figure out what was happening. And it was Van Helsing, this man, this learned man who was a professor, a doctor, a lawyer himself, saying we have to be open-minded about the old ways. The old ways as well as proof. You can't prove everything scientifically. There are things that take a long time to prove. So let's try to wrap this up. Are there any more last-minute questions, folks? Write them down in any of these locations, either the private chat and here we go. Yeah, you're right. You're right, Pugs. I love that quote. I actually have it printed on a T-shirt with a picture of Bram on it. I love that quote. It just sums him up so well.
Yeah, it really, really does. If you don't mind, if I can squeeze in one quick question here, Dacre.
Do it, man.
I know that one of the things that may never be solved, although there's some technology that might help us out down the road when it's not so stupid expensive and you have to be best friends with Zuckerberg or something and have him owe you a favor. But regarding obviously Bram's, his actual illness and what it really was, aside from that being a thing that you would love to discover, is there something that's most prominent that you're really after, that you're just thinking, man, there's some clues out there, and if I can just find a few more to put together, then I would just love to uncover this mystery of Bram Stoker or Dracula that is just left as of now unsolved?
Well, you've already touched on the thing I think I answered in another podcast with you before, and that is what it's illness. So I think other than that, there's always a sort of game you play called if you could have dinner, with somebody, that's no longer living, celebrity or not, I'd love to sit down with the guy and just kind of find out, what his life was like. He was second fiddle to a really famous guy, Henry Irving, and he always played in the shadows. And, you got to be the right kind of guy to 27 years be behind an egomaniac who was a, really popular actor, but needed constantly to have someone like Bram to kind of lift him up. And Bram gets a lot of kudos in obituaries for helping Henry Irving become the first actor ever knighted for his contributions to the theater. So, what was it like working with this guy? What was it like being that dog's body that's always the detail-oriented guy? 8 tours to America. That's 16 Atlantic crossings. That's not just, that's just not a plane flight for 8 hours. That's, weeks. So right. Just kind of what was going on. And, I'd like to know more about, are my theories that I've developed about him by reading his journal, by reading his works, are they accurate? Is he a complex, interesting kind of guy that, shared the love of sport like I did early in his life, and then gravitated more to management, and then expressed himself in writing like I have done. So I just want to get to know him as a guy, hang out with him for a couple hours. Rick, that's what I'd love to do. No like golden bullet answer. It's just hang out with him at a either private family reunion, or if a couple of us were together, and get out and hit a tennis ball, or go for a round of golf. His wife was loved golf. Bram enjoyed while she was golfing at Cruden Bay, just like walking on the beach and thinking and talking and chatting and writing his notes down. That's what I'd like to do, Rick, if I had the chance.
Yeah, just hang out with them and just be a couple of guys and get to know each other. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, agreed. That would be just absolutely fascinating to do that. So, Dacre, I really appreciate this again. The time, thanks so much for picking up and giving us the unabridged presentation to be able to dive a lot deeper into things. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And I love the part. I don't know if anybody here has any favorite uncovered secrets of theirs. I know my personal one is the very ending of it. It just fascinates me that, of course, we all think in the original published novel that's it, Dracula's no more. Of course, he goes on to various iterations, but the fact that his castle got buried by this volcano, we don't really know if he actually went and got killed, or if it's just simply underneath all that ash, just waiting to kind of wake up at some point and just keeps going on. And if maybe Bram had still,
I got to tell you this, and then I got to jump. I got three books in the works right now, Rick, and one of them touches on exactly what you just said. So I couldn't help it. I'm writing with L.A. Selby, a friend of mine who her and her husband came with me on one of my tours to Romania. We climbed that freaking mountain. We started talking about it when we're on the mountain. So hopefully we're in final editing now of a story that continues and talks about that right there. The other one is with a professor from University of North Georgia, Lev Butts. We have written about the summer Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, almost as if we were hanging with him in Cruden Bay, Scotland, and weird stuff that was happening.
Oh, that's cool.
That's it. And then with John Polisano, I got another book out that has nothing to do with vampires. I figure I had to do something else, but it's my other passion, fly fishing in Alaska when things go wrong, and horrifying things go wrong. So keep looking out for me, dacrestoker.com. BramStokerEstate.com is the family website. And you'll hear, and I'm sure I'll when these books come out, I'll be back on the Dark Bites podcast, and you can hear more about me and what I'm doing. But thank you, Rick. Thank you, everybody else, for being here, and also for DreadCon. Thanks for putting on a great show, and hopefully we'll touch base with you guys next year. All right.
Sounds fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And I'll put links down below too. So if everybody watching this on the replay, I'll get a link in there as well to the Bram Stoker thing, so we can get that wine as soon as it becomes available. And I'll put a link down out there, of course, to Dacre for some of the books that you mentioned as well.
Thank you.
If you guys feel free to hit like on the video too, that'll push it out to more Dracula fans as well, so that we can get this history out there, so that much like Dracula, it also will continue on and remain undead for other people to discover.
There you go. That's a great tie-in. All right, everybody. Good night now. Take care. Have a great spooky season. Safe Halloween. Bye-bye.
Good night. Sleep restless, everyone.